Ura je natančno...
Dober večer.
Natančno 19 in ker moramo se ure držati po protokolu, zaradi nastavitve 5. rednega občnega zbora, je prva stvar, ki jo bomo storili, ta, da se bomo prešteli. Prva stvar, da se bomo na 170. Srečanju prešteli in to, da vidimo, koliko nas je najprej na Zoomu, se pravi 11, potem pa tukaj pa imamo nas tudi 7, ok, super, 18 trenutno. Moramo zdaj za 1 uro prestaviti na čakanje, to se pravi 1 uro, bomo zdaj imeli nekaj drugega, ker ne moremo uradno nadaljevati z našim 5. rednim občnim zborom. Tako da vas povabim, seveda najprej, da na začetku malo poklepetamo, oziroma, gledajte tako, jaz bom zdaj samo povedal za prejšnji teden, toliko, da potrdimo zapisnike, da potrdimo vse te uradne stvari, potem pa bo še kdo kaj povedal, pa imam pa pripravljen en zanimiv vsebinski film, ki nam bo marsikaj dobrega povedal in nas tudi naučil. Dobrodošli, je že kar lepa številka, a ne? Lepa številka se je nabrala. Naš program danes, a ne? Naš program danes, evo, srečanja, je, tako kot smo rekli, ob 19. otvoritev 5. rednega srečanja občnega zbora Društva Belis, pregled prisotnosti, ki smo ga takoj na začetku opravili ob 19. Teja, naslednji je ob 20. uri, ne? Ob 20. uri se preštejemo ponovno, ker nas ni bilo polovico. Pregled zapisnika 169. Zooma, vas vprašam, ali ima kdo kakšno pripombo na zapisnik prejšnjega tedna. Danes je Teja z nami, Teja, srčna hvala, ker je bil zajeten zapisnik, mislim, da okrog 12 strani je to naredila vsega skupaj in je res bogata vsebina, splača se prebrati, so noter tudi določeni linki, povezave, ki vas pripeljajo do marsikaterih spoznanj in ugotovitev glede preteklega časa in seveda tudi za naprej je dobro, če take stvari poznamo. Ima kdo kakšno pripombo? Na Zoomu ne, tukaj? Tudi ne. Ok, potem lahko rečem, da je zapisnik z dne 22. junija 2024 z našega 169. rednega društvenega srečanja sprejet in tudi ta zapisnik bo odšel lepo v naš arhiv. Sedaj pa imamo potem naprej, se pravi, ta ugotovitvena prisotnost, ki je, bomo šli malo naprej pogledati program. Glejte, v tem prvem delu sem jaz pripravil zdaj za to urco, za teh slabih 60 minut, koliko jih bo ostalo po predstavitvi, trajna nezmožnost nacionalne zaščite pred nevidnimi grožnjami v dobi biološkega orožja za najem. Biološko orožje se danes vzamejo v najem, če imaš denar. Naročiš cepiva, pocepeš narod in narediš genocid, democid, kakorkoli se že temu reče. Če nimaš denarja, moraš biti pa podložen in služiti gospodarju, ki to ima, sicer te lahko pokonča. Oprostite, kar govorim, ampak takšni so danes časi, v takšnih časih živimo. Seveda, to se vse igra v imenu zdravja, v imenu lepega, dobrega, v ozadju je pa, kot vemo, agenda, urnik, do 2:30, to do 2:35, spet neki do 2:45 in 50 imajo spet neki v mislih, ampak so se malo gospodje zašili, ne? Pri covidu smo se zbudili, zdaj vemo, zakaj gre, ugotovili smo, da smo lučke, moramo skupaj držati in glejte, v današnjem globalnem povezovalnem svetu, tako kot piše na vašem zaslonu, če ga vidite, napredki v biotehnologiji posegajo v meje, kjer se človek sooča z novo vrsto grožnje. In to je orožje za najem. Biološko orožje, ki ga lahko uporabijo teroristi, kriminalne organizacije ali pa v tem primeru, kakor smo bili priče v covidu, celo države. In to predstavlja resno nevarnost za svetovni mir in tudi za svetovno varnost. In zato toliko govorijo o varnosti, ne? Ampak s pomočjo varnosti, zdaj, da bomo varni, nas je treba vse pocepiti. Ne, hvala lepa. Sploh pa terapija. Ugotovili smo, da je genska terapija namenjena za tiste, ki so bolni. Če si pa bolan, pa lahko zdravljenje gladko malo odsloviš in rečeš, hvala lepa, to je moja pravica, da rečem ne. Ne? Ker terapija pomeni, da si bolan in rabiš terapijo. Če pa je cepljenje, cepivo pa ne prepreči nalezljivosti oziroma širjenja nalezljivih bolezni. To je pa bilo dokazano o COVID-u, tako da v vsakem primeru, gospodje, dragi, ki to poslušate in boste kasneje poslušali, hvala lepa za vašo ponudbo, za vaša free cepiva ali terapije. Ne? In gledajte, ali je v tem svetu s temi možnostmi, ki so zdaj in pritiski, mogoče, da država ostane neutralna v svetu, kjer biološko orožje postaja vse bolj dostopno in vse bolj nevarno. O tem bi vas zdaj jaz popeljal z naslovom Trajna nevarnost nezmožnosti nacionalne zaščite v dobi najemanja biološkega orožja. In sem tukaj v bistvu pripravil za vas, glejte, biološko orožje so danes mikroorganizmi, virusi, toksini ali pa drugi biološki agensi za povzročanje bolezni, dolgoročnega hendikepa, v neredkih primerih celo smrti, in to zdaj prenašajo v glavnem na živali, rastline, ljudi in kakor temu rečejo One Health, ker je vse gensko spremenjeno. V tem svetu, kjer posameznik ali manjše skupine pridobijo in uporabijo takšno orožje, se ponavlja nova raven negotovosti in strahu. Sicer pa gledajte, dajmo si pogledati, kaj nam ima o tem povedati dr. David E. Martin, in čez kakšno urco se vidimo in se ponovno preštejemo.
I find it particularly interesting that we have Herr Steiner on the wall, and the reason for that is because I think many of us have lost our way with respect to the notion that in many respects the challenge we face today is a challenge that is in large part an outgrowth of our failure to understand that there are not experts. There are individuals who have developed very precise perspective, but that doesn't necessarily make them an expert. That simply means that they have a very specific perspective. And one of the mistakes that we've made, and one of the mistakes that my wife Kim, who's sitting in the row here, and I would love for you to all acknowledge the amazing work that she's done to stand beside me throughout the last several years on the mission that we're on. Kim, if you would stand up. One of the things that Kim has said repeatedly is that one of the biggest mistakes we've made over the last probably several thousand years is we believe that if people look up to someone on a stage, somehow or another that imputes some elevated perspective or elevated knowledge. And in keeping with the tradition of the Anabaptist movement from which my family lineage comes, I thought that it would be appropriate to actually not be on a stage tonight. And the reason for that is because this should be a conversation. I'm going to be directly delivering exceptionally problematic information to a room full of people where my intention is not to convince you of a thing, not to persuade you of a thing at all. My intent is to lay out a series of observations and then engage in a conversation, this Q&A that allows us to say, if this perspective that we now have is the case, what is our response? What is the way in which we take that information and apply it? Because information for its own sake is just that. It's just information. But until we actually can figure out how do we take that information and bring it to application, then we don't have knowledge. Then we don't have wisdom. All we have is facts. And facts aren't going to help us. I've said very frequently, I've never met a fact that can overwhelm a belief. I think I'm in good company. Okay? And quite tragically, I found that in the United States, at least, many of the people who deeply appreciated and respected the tradition of Steiner happened to be the first ones to line their children up to get jabbed, which I found to be an enormously puzzling and actually quite tragic indictment on what happens when we elevate an expert but fail to understand the spirit from which the expertise arose. I can absolutely and unequivocally guarantee you that if he was with us right now, he would not be saying, line up your kids and get them genetically modified. That would not be the recommendation. However, many of the people who advanced the cause for which Steiner is most known were the very early ones to send the lambs to the slaughter. And this is truly a remarkable tragedy. But it's not more or less remarkable the tragedy that we have when the Pope decides to say that genetic modification of people is a, quote, gift from God. This is the same church that merely 20 years earlier issued a papal bull that said genetically modified nature is a violation of the divine order. And 20 years later, and a couple sheep that got a little weird, some of you got the joke. Most of you didn't, but it'll come, it'll come, it'll come. 20 years after Dolly, now we have the Pope telling us that genetically modified humans are a gift from God and setting the stage for the CRISPR technology, which will be the gene editing technology, which is actually the ultimate affront to everything that the church actually advocated for nearly 1,000 years. That will be now put on the altar so that we can actually line the faithful up to edit out the genetics that we modified into the genetics, courtesy of the gift from God. You couldn't make this up. But what was the central problem? The central problem was belief, not observation of fact, critical thought, analysis, conversation, and action. Which is, in fact, what this gentleman encouraged all of us to pursue. So I feel that it's particularly interesting in light of that my presentation tonight, which was originally intended for Zurich, but here we are. We took a left when we should have gone right. I don't know. Permanent neutrality in an era of biological weapons for hire. This is a conversation we should only have in Switzerland because Switzerland has a very unique role in the world and on the world stage where we should be having different conversations. And as a result of that, that's what our intent is tonight. Now, many of you are familiar with my presentations, and I have a moral obligation in every presentation to open my speeches with this quote. This is the admission, unambiguously, which states, without any equivocation, that the reason for the global terror campaign that began officially in the minds of most people in late 2019 was a premeditated plan of terrorism, collusion, coercion, and ultimately murder. And worse than all of the other facts that we'll talk about tonight is the criminals admitted to the crime in their own words. This quote is the admission of 4 felonies, regardless of which side of the Atlantic you're on, and let's go through it. To sustain the funding base beyond the crisis, we need to increase the public understanding for the need for medical countermeasures, such as a pan-influenza or a pan-coronavirus vaccine. Just there, we have the admission of 2 crimes. To increase the funding base. Did you hear that? not to expand public health, not to help humanity, to increase the funding base beyond a crisis. This quote from 2015 was not on the eve of or in the wake of a crisis. So, what's the crisis that we need to sustain the funding base beyond a crisis that's not there in 2014 and 2015? Well, the crisis was that there was a reduction in funding of biological weapons programs sponsored by the World Health Organization. The crisis was not a health crisis, it was a funding crisis for the people who actually were running out of money for their bioweapons programs. Oops. Those are two crimes. Now let's go on. A key driver is the media, and the economics will follow the hype. Another admission of two crimes. Let's start with hype. What's that? That's actually psychological terror. We're going to build a program, we're going to recite COVID count, COVID death, COVID count, COVID death, COVID count, COVID death, and we're going to get a mind control loop going. Oh my God, there's a pandemic. We're going to use the media to create the hype. And the economics will follow the hype. Second crime. What's that? That's actually economic conspiracy, because economics that follow hype is not informed consent. That's not willing buyer, willing seller, informed of all the facts. That is an intent to defraud. Under Crown law, we call it fraudulent conveyance, when you actually don't inform a counterparty of the risks associated with a contract. We have under Crown law the principle of the notion of fraudulent conveyance. And why is this important? And by the way, I have yet to meet a lawyer in a room who's bothered to read the law on this one. The reason why fraudulent conveyance is such an important principle in the law is that the legal obligation if someone engaged in fraud in contracting is the fraud perpetrating party is required under the law to actually not just recompense the damage, but their legal obligation is to return the damaged party to their pre-damaged state. You hear that? It's not, we're going to give you a couple bucks for your pain and suffering. No. You are legally required to return the condition to the pre-damaged state. Wow. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a single lawyer on the planet who actually bothered to read fraudulent conveyance when they read this? Because what would be the consequence? The penalty is not, we're going to find a financial, compensation scheme for the injured, which, by the way, is the high water mark we have in our society right now. We'll give you a couple bucks for your autism. We'll give you a couple bucks for your Bell's palsy. We'll give you a couple bucks for the dead child. We'll give you a couple bucks for the permanent disability. Right? That's our current high water mark. But that's not what the legal standard is for fraudulent conveyance. Fraudulent conveyance, legal standard says, return to its pre-damaged state. Why don't we talk about this? Well, we don't talk about it because we're cowed to talk about it. We have been cowed into submission to believe that somehow or another that's too much to ask for. That would be inconvenient. Really? How about myocarditis? That's inconvenient. How about very rapidly acting cancers? That's inconvenient. These are inconveniences, to be sure, but we're not even asking for what we should ask for. And we should ask for something because if we followed the law, we would actually recommend not a financial compensation. We would recommend a return to the pre-damaged state. By the way, I'm not making up the law. This is the law. And the reason why we don't have the remedy in front of our face is because we don't have the people who have the courage to stand up and ask for it. We haven't even had a judge rule on this. You know why? It's never been presented. It's kind of a bummer. We can't even lose because we don't even try. We don't even have the honor to fail with dignity, which is staggering. By the way, I'll go through other slides faster, but this one's an important one. Because if you don't get what's being done in here, if you don't see the admission of all 8 crimes, you haven't seen the crime. We need to use that hype to our advantage. Wow, to get to the real issue. And what's the real issue? Investors will respond if they see profit at the end of the process. Wow. So the pan-coronavirus vaccine program, which was publicly announced during the gain-of-function moratorium in the United States, and by virtue of the pause in the United States, all U.S. affiliated programs worldwide, that gain-of-function moratorium was going on while we were announcing a global plan of global terrorism for a pan-coronavirus vaccine, which, by the way, the World Health Organization, based here in Switzerland, have I mentioned, declared eradicated a year earlier. How do we need a vaccine for an eradicated disease during a gain-of-function moratorium, when there's theoretically no chance that we could have a reason to need a vaccine for a thing that doesn't exist? Well, because we were making it, Ralph Barrick, we were hyping it, Peter Daszak. He's the one who gave that quote, by the way, in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, published in February 2015. And we were going to hijack liberty with it. Now, many of you have seen these slides, and I am not going to bore you with the details that exist in the speech I gave at the European Union Parliament on May of 2023. And if you haven't seen that, that's unfortunate, because over half the world's total population has now not only downloaded it, but watched it. And the funniest thing about this is I was in a hotel in New York when a person came up to me and said, "Oh my God, you're David Martin." And I said, "Well, yes." And he said, "You know you're a TikTok influencer." I didn't know I was a TikTok influencer. I know I have a very cute butt, but I didn't know I was a TikTok influencer. That was news to me. But according to TikTok, 800 million people have downloaded it on TikTok. 800 million. More than, I don't know, somebody who shakes their booty on TikTok. That's how many people like what I had to say. This is an amazing thing. But 4 billion people have seen that video. And what makes that video particularly important is these 2 slides. And what makes these 2 slides important is, first, the recognition that the isolation of what we have decided to call, and by the way, I'm going to be very precise in my language here, so you can try to misquote me later in a question, but you won't get there. The thing we decided to call coronavirus, we decided to call coronavirus in 1965. Okay? Not 2003, not 2019, 1965. And by 1967, the United States and the UK actually began an exchange program where we were taking pathogens from the United States and injecting them or spewing them into healthy volunteers in the United Kingdom as part of our biological weapons program. So if anybody sits there and goes, "Well, maybe it leaked from a lab," no, it didn't leak. The first thing that ever was done with the toxins associated with the coronavirus model was people in the U.S. took samples to the UK and infected healthy volunteers. Now, I don't know If you're familiar with what a healthy volunteer is in the United States or in the United Kingdom, but I'm going to break some news to you. Healthy volunteers mean enlisted people in the military who do not have informed consent protection. We murdered people. But don't worry, it gets better. Because obviously we wouldn't want that to happen. In this beautiful paper that I wish everybody would read, because I'm amazed at how many people think it's surprising that somehow or another we have cardiac, myocarditis and other cardiac events. In 1992, Ralph Barrick at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, figured out how to take a pathogen that used to infect the gut and used to infect the lungs, and figured out how to alter it with a chimera so that it would infect the heart. Now, pause and think about what I just said. What manner of human being on earth would go, it's giving you a little gastroenteritis, it's giving you a little of a head cold, maybe a little bit of a sniffle. I wonder if we could modify it so it hit your heart. Think about this. What goes on in the head of a person who says, this was a little glitch in my tummy, it was a little sniffle in my nose, let's see if we can make it hit hearts. And not just hit hearts, but create cardiomyopathy. One of the most lethal heart inflammations possible, which really has a beautiful usual mortality end, where your heart ruptures. Isn't that beautiful? A lovely thought. We're going to see if we can do something that would create a condition in which the likely outcome is the rupturing of a heart. And that was 1992. It gets better. Pfizer decides to patent their first spike protein vaccine in November of 2000. Operation Warp Speed. If by warp speed we mean maple syrup running in, I don't know, the top of the Alps in February. That's how fast this is. From November of 2000 until 2019. That's how fast we went with a spike protein vaccine. Or maybe we should go back and look and see what happened in those trials to find out that when we tried to create vaccines for coronavirus, you know what we did? We killed the animals that we put the vaccines into. Which would explain why the University of California, San Francisco's Institutional Review Board in the summer of 2020 was told that the coronavirus vaccine clinical trials was a straight-to-humans protocol. That's a quote. Despite the fact that every single trial from November of 2000 until then had killed all of the animals into which the experimental injections were placed. So that would be a great reason to say, let's do a straight-to-humans protocol, because we wouldn't want the inconvenience of having safety data that would suggest that it kills animals. I'm glad that there's a pause here. You kind of can't make this egregious level of a crime up unless you realize that behind this there must be another crime. Because each one of these, in and of themselves, is horrific. But the sum of them becomes much, much, much more problematic. And let's go ahead and jump to the wonderful creation of the patent that was filed in 2002, which is actually the reason why I am done with everybody who asks the question, was there a novel virus? Was there a novel disease? Let's stipulate with the facts that there were neither. There's not a novel virus. There was a variety of biological weapons designed off of the back of the patent that was filed in 2002, which was the infectious replication defective clone of coronavirus. Now let's slow down and answer the question, what does that phrase mean? Infectious replication defective. Infectious means we want to target a cell in the body to make sure the thing that we're injecting goes into the cell. That's what infectious means. Replication defective means we want the information that we inject to infect that cell, but not replicate and spread to others. Which means that the bioweapon itself was engineered as a weapon to hit a target, but not proliferate. That's what the patented technology is. Which is the reason why when we had SARS 1.0 in 2002 and 2003, the world was all supposed to die. Remember that? We were going to have dead people everywhere. And as hard as we tried to make it into a pandemic, as hard as we tried, we could only kick 900 people off the mountain. And that was the global pandemic. Why? Because the weapon worked. If you expose somebody to the toxic agent, they died. But they didn't spread it to others. Which is the reason why we did not have the transmission of SARS 1.0. Because you can't transmit a thing that's designed not to replicate. But worse still, what is the definition of a virus if you subscribe to the definition of a virus? A virus is a replicating protein sequence. Guess what this isn't? Replication defective means we took the virus out of a virus. It was not a replicating device. It was, in fact, a weapon. Now, I've got tons of people who go, Dave, you're crossing a line. Don't say it's a weapon. It's not a weapon. You can't call it a weapon. You offend people who kill people when you call it a weapon. Well, guess what? If you're offended, I don't care. Because I didn't call it a weapon. The guy who built it called it a weapon. And not kind of. In 2005, the mRNA spike protein was actually heralded in a conference hosted by DARPA and by MITRE in the United States as, and are you ready for this? Synthetic coronaviruses biohacking. And now, are you ready for this? Biological warfare enabling technology. Let's see, I wonder what that could mean. Let's think of all the things that could mean. Biological warfare enabling technology sounds like public health for accidental releases, doesn't it? No. When you say biological warfare enabling technology, you know what you're saying it is? A biological warfare agent. I'm not the one saying that it's biological weapons. I'm not the one saying it's biological warfare. The perpetrator called it that in 2005 and was rewarded with a dual entry budget, where the budget that went to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill received money from Anthony Fauci's NIAID NIH budget, and exactly at the same time each one of those checks was written, are you ready for this? Anthony Fauci had a second checkbook. And that second checkbook came from the Department of Defense Pandemic Preparedness Program. And guess what that was? An equal matching non-competition grant. Non-competition grant. Now, there's two people in the room that might understand what I'm about to say, but that's, in Europe, a violation of anti-competition laws. You're not allowed to double down on a public grant without any competition or transparency saying that this agency is going to give you $10 million over here and this one's going to give you $10 million over here. Why? Because this one gave you $10 million. Not because it was fair, not because it was open, not because it was transparent, not because there was actually grant competition. It's by virtue of the determination of one side, the other side de facto matched the money. And that started in 2005, not in 2019. And so you've heard things like, oh, Peter Daszak, EcoHealth Alliance, 2015, did the thing in China. Yeah, with the $3.4 million that he took. But conveniently, you're not told of the over $141 million, which is slightly more than $3.4 million. You're not told of the $140 million that went into the bioweapons program at the universities led by University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Why do I care about this? Why should we care about this? I'm amazed at how many people try to figure out this crime. Clearly, governments wouldn't do that, would they? Clearly, the World Health Organization is all about health, isn't it? Clearly, these are good people. They were misguided, but good people. No, they're not. They are criminals, intent to kill humanity. And I have the audacity to stand in front of you tonight and say, if a criminal is intending to kill humanity, I, for one, feel like a human being ought to point that out. Not sit there and go, well, maybe, Dave, but really, aren't you being a little harsh? A little harsh? I'm being a little harsh when I say that a person who got rewarded financially for doing biological weapon creation with synthetic coronavirus models, which actually were promulgated around the world and experimented on and killing people. I'm a little harsh when I say that's a problem. I don't think so. And I'm ready for all of us to get comfortable with saying that. If somebody's killing human beings, we shouldn't be trying to be politically correct. They do not identify as murderers. Few of you got the joke. If you're in America, that's a knockdown. Everybody's rolling in the aisles. Now, I have been the most ardent advocate for shaming the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill for a very good reason. Most people don't know why, so I'm going to give you the tar on their heels. That's Tar Heels are the name of North Carolina. Blood on their hands. I'm going to give you the reason why I have such an absolute aversion to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And the reason is because in 1984, the state of North Carolina, not just the university, but the state of North Carolina sold itself to the Wellcome businesses, GlaxoSmithKline, and the whole Wellcome companies. The reason why you've heard the term maybe Research Triangle Institute or Research Triangle Park, which is University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Duke University, and North Carolina State University. The reason why you've heard of the Research Triangle is because the state of North Carolina sold its universities to GlaxoSmithKline Wellcome. And they did it because of AZT. AZT was on patent, and we needed a state in the United States to be ground zero to make sure that AZT became the drug of choice for the treatment of HIV. So in 1984, we invent HIV, conveniently for the purpose of making sure we have one treatment, AZT. Here's the interesting little fact that very few people know, but if you go back and look at the videos of Anthony Fauci in 1985 and 1986, what you'll find is he's talking about maybe we should get a vaccine for HIV. But he suddenly got a knock on the door from GlaxoSmithKline going, hey, Mr. Fauci, don't start that project until the patent on AZT runs out. I'm not making this up. It's actually videos that you can see. And so mysteriously, courtesy of the Welcome AZT protest, from 1991 to 1996, the world was told that the only treatment for HIV was AZT, and as such, the patent and the rest of the patent life on AZT could expire so that GlaxoSmithKline Wellcome could get all of the money for the patented technology for a thing that was killing patients that allegedly had HIV. Murder for hire. And the state of North Carolina sold the state so that that could happen. Conveniently, NIAID, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, decided that UNC Chapel Hill was its go-to institution while AZT was in its monopoly run to actually begin the process of doing HIV vaccine research, which is the reason why Ralph Barrick in 1992, and you'll note the date, right? So 91 and 96 is the AZT cover story, and underneath that you have Ralph Barrick genetically modifying and making chimeras of this coronavirus thing to create an HIV vaccine, which is going to conveniently roll out in 1997 as the patent on AZT expires. Which is the reason why you need to figure out how to get the gastrointestinal and flu problem to become a heart problem. Because you need to actually get that package, that little envelope around what we call coronavirus. You need to get the envelope to deliver the HIV vaccine. So all of the funding for the HIV vaccine that was going to this program was actually going to use coronavirus as the packet in which the HIV vaccine was going to be delivered. That's the model. By the way, hundreds of papers on this. And this is why this question of, in the recent injections, is there HIV fragments somewhere in any of this stuff? The answer is, of course there is. It was designed into it. And it was designed into it not a couple of years ago, not by Moderna, not by BioNTech. This was designed in many, many years earlier. And, not surprisingly, from 96 to 99, Ralph Barrick begins the weaponization of this allegedly synthetic coronavirus envelope to become a vaccine vector. 1999 comes along, and lo and behold, Barrick and Fauci create what I affectionately call Franken-CoEV. What's that? That is the monster, that's the chimera, that's the idea that we can change surface glycans, we can change surface spike proteins, we can change surface oligomerization, we can do all kinds of things to modify this thing so we can actually have this thing, the packet shell, which we called the outer edge of coronavirus, we can allow that to be the carrier of getting anything we want into any cell we want. Which is the reason why the 2002 patent becomes interesting. Now, put a pin in that, because we're going to come back to the 2002 patent, because there's a mystery in that patent. It's filed in 2002, which means it should have expired in 2022. You know what people with patents don't like? Not to make money on the thing that they patented before the patent runs out. Just hold that thought. I'm not saying that they did. I'm not saying bad people did bad things, because that would make me judgy. But I am wondering, if I had a patent on a thing that I thought was valuable, would it be nice to have a reason for that thing's value to be visible before the patent expires? That's all I'm asking. Now, this is a terrible projector on a terrible screen with a terribly structured slide. So I'm going to go ahead and jump up on the stage so that you can see what I'm pointing to. But this is the letter that was sent to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill on October the 21st, 2014. This is the letter that was sent. If anybody remembers, 2014 gain-of-function moratorium in the fall of 2014, and we've heard Anthony Fauci say, well, we never funded gain-of-function research. So it's quite problematic when you see that this letter came from the National Institutes of Health, National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, Bethesda, Maryland, which sounds like NIAID. Why? Because it is NIAID. So that sounds like it. Their letterhead to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Dear Ms. Settle, NIAID has determined that the above reference grant, and that's AI 1077810-02, has determined that that research grant is subject to the gain-of-function moratorium. But Fauci says they never funded it. But on October the 21st, 2014, they said Ralph Barrick's research was a gain-of-function project. Well, did you fund it? Did you not? Let's read on, shall we? Role of uncharacterized genes in high pathogenic human coronavirus infection. Wow, that sounds like probably, I don't know, gain-of-function research. And then the research is to see if we can have novel functions of viral replication in vitro, which means, can we get it to reproduce itself in a petri dish? And I'm being crass there. Virologists out there are going to go, not a petri dish. You're right. But the second line is the one that's the damning evidence. The second line of that statement was not in the original grant. And that was viral modification to see if we can increase human pathogenesis in vivo. Not only did we say you could keep doing the gain-of-function research, we changed the research to include seeing if you could increase pathogenesis in humans in vivo. Does anybody have a tiny problem with what is on that letter? No. And does anybody else have a tiny problem that not a single elected or appointed representative of any government agency anywhere on this planet has ever put that letter into the public? Why wouldn't they do that? That would be really bad marketing, wouldn't it? It'd be very bad marketing. But you say, but Dave, did they really say that they could keep doing the gain-of-function research? Well, why don't I go ahead and inconveniently read this very small print right here at the bottom of this paragraph on the first page of the letter, so you don't even have to read the whole letter. As your grant is currently funded, this pause is voluntary. See, you almost have to laugh until you realize that 2 billion human beings are going to be incapacitated or killed because of this letter. 2 billion people will be incapacitated or killed because of this letter. And then it's not funny anymore. And let's get the last little punchline, because this feeds into that opening quote that I showed you. Because remember, the opening quote was to sustain the funding. Remember, that's what we were doing. We're sustaining funding. As this grant is already funded, the pause is voluntary, and you can continue to conduct the applicable GOF, gain of function, research until the end of the currently active budget period. At which point all of you should say, well, what was the currently active budget period in this grant? Well, you ready for this? It didn't have a termination date. It was a non-competitive, perpetually funded grant. So maybe we'll just tidy this thing up. We'll just wrap it up. We'll all be done, and we'll go home for Christmas. No. Worse than this. What will happen? What will happen is this little group comes along and says, hey, the World Health Organization is a really cool way to get legal immunity from things where the crime that I'm doing cannot be investigated or prosecuted. That's Article 13 of the Charter of the World Health Organization. Did you hear me? You cannot be investigated or prosecuted under Article 13 of the Charter. So wouldn't it be interesting if we know that we have a biological weapon, wouldn't it be cool to start a vaccine development program under the World Health Organization's Gavi, under the World Health Organization's Charter? Because what happens if, God forbid, a bald guy from Virginia ever convinces the world to say we should hold some people accountable? Well, who is going to be held accountable? They actually knew that if they put the project under the WHO, it was shielded from all criminal investigation and all criminal liability forever.
How come a constitution might be above law?
Because that's the charter that we all signed in the 1940s. We all agreed to that, remember? Remember, we all agreed that it would be a good idea. It would be a good idea to take an institution funded by a pharmaceutical company. It'd be a really good idea if we took an institution funded by a pharmaceutical company to write a law that says that any actions taken by that organization funded by a pharmaceutical company can never be criminally prosecuted ever in any jurisdiction. You mean, oh, whoa, hold on a second. So you're saying that if a criminal could write a law that says, here are the crimes I'm going to commit, but I'm going to go ahead and write a law that says none of my crimes can ever be prosecuted, nothing wrong could go into that story, right? Nothing bad could happen from that. It gets far worse. What did they do? They actually made sure that despite the fact that by that time, in 2011, we had the Global Vaccine Action Plan, we had a 10-year goal that said that between 2010 and 2020, the world would accept a universal influenza or coronavirus vaccine. For a disease that we said was eradicated. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? We would actually have, and their words, not mine, an accidental or intentional release of a respiratory pathogen. What's wrong with that phrase? An accidental or intentional release? Does that sound like somebody spilled something in their coffee in the lab? No. Release is an active, intent-filled word. It is not an oops accident. This is not a bat and a pangolin went into a bar in Wuhan, got it on one night, and boop, out came baby COVID. Which is a story you're supposed to believe. You're supposed to believe that story, instead of reading the actual words from the criminals themselves. But that's okay. We're going to have the WHO investigate the crime that they did. And what we're going to do is we're going to have the guy who said we need to create media hype, we're going to have that guy be the leader of the investigation. That is akin to having a bank robber standing on the steps of the bank with a bag of money and going up to the bank robber with the sirens going and the police running into the bank and saying, "Excuse me, you look like an expert in this topic. Would you care to comment on the economic theory of theft?" And his response would be, "Well, the money was in that building. I wanted it. So I went in with my gun and my N95 mask because I'm helping save Granny. And I took the bag of money and I came out, and my economic theory is now I have their money and now it's my money." And you go, "Thank you very much for explaining economic theory. Go on your merry way," which is exactly what the World Health Organization did. That's exactly what they did. And we're all sitting there going, well, surely somebody's going to do a legitimate investigation, right? No! That was the investigation. Interview the bank robber with the bag of money and then pay his cab fare to send him on his way. Now, once again, small slides. I apologize for this. But I want you to see that this is not just COVID. This is a crime that keeps going and going and going. This was the childhood immunization program, phase 3, and are you ready for this? 2011. And we should have had this conversation in 2011, but we didn't. But let's look at the deaths of children in the malaria vaccine clinical trials in 2011. Let's look at how many kids died. And by the way, these are kids that need to die anyhow because they're little kids. They really are, they're going to make too much noise. They might cry. They might soil themselves in a restaurant. They may offend us. So we're not going to mind that these kids died. Fatal serious adverse events, 66 in the malaria vaccine clinical trial, 28 in the control group. And you go, well, what is that? That's about 2 times more people died in the vaccine trial than the control group. But then you read out what the control group was. You know what the control group was? A cocktail of vaccines. Not saline. So we murdered. This is not, oops, accident happened. We murdered these children in 2011 for a malaria vaccine. When we did the clinical trial, we murdered them. And when people attempted to hold the clinical trials agents accountable for their actions, guess what they referred to? They referred to Article 13 of their representatives and members, immunity from personal arrest or detention and from seizure of personal baggage in respect to words spoken or written and all acts done by them in their official capacity, immunity from legal process of every kind. That's in the charter of what we call the World Health Organization. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the mafia. And we should stop pretending it's something else. It is an embarrassment to the Swiss people. It is an embarrassment to the Swiss government that the World Health Organization exists in this place. Because the Swiss have enabled the organized crime of the World Health Organization, and they have enabled it so that real individuals can murder children under the age of 3 months. Murder them. And we don't care. I get passionate about this. You know why? Not because I'm the son of preachers. I'm not going to have an altar call at the end and ask you to be saved. As a matter of fact, I want you to live with the hell I'm dropping you into right now. We, the people, cannot allow this to happen. We cannot allow it to happen. We're talking about the treaty for the international health nonsense that the World Health Organization is talking about now. You know why they're doing this? To distract us from the fact that we should be talking about the World Health Organization itself, not the treaty. And as long as Section 13 of Article 5 remains in the Charter, I don't care what treaties they pass. It doesn't matter. Because the institution is corrupt at its core. And you can't fix that. That is a license to kill, and we, the people, are willing to live with it. Now, people sit there going, Dave, are you really upset at the WHO? No, I'm really upset not at the WHO. I'm upset at the criminals that set the WHO up. But I'm also upset with the WHO because it's a criminal organization. When I say it's a criminal organization, let's unpack the facts. In 1910, when the Flexner Report was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Carnegies and others, what we did was we decided to get rid of that guy, legitimately, like really, get rid of that guy, and everything anybody like that spoke about. We decided to do that, and we decided to go into the pharmaceutical, allopathic, great new world of crazy industrial pharmaceuticals. And I happened to drive by Roche on the way in, so I feel really good about pissing off somebody who works at Roche here. I don't know, maybe you work at Roche.
Za trenutek se bomo ustavili pri tem res hudem predavanju, ki nam pove res vse. In ura je 20, ob 20:00 bomo samo preverili ponovni pregled prisotnosti članov Društva Belis. In na podlagi pisnih obvestil članom, ki smo vam jih poslali, vse, ki ste se zdaj med tem časom, ko se nismo slišali in videli, dodatno prijavili na Zoom, vas prav prisrčno pozdravljam. Vam želim prijeten večer. In sicer smo vas obvestili, da bo danes ob 19. uri s pričetkom 5. redni občni zbor Društva Belis. Sedaj pa ob 20. uri ponovno ugotavljamo samo prisotnost in ugotavljamo, da je na Zoomu 28, razen če ste kje po 2, dajte to vedeti. Ste samo po 1 pred Zoomom, a ne? Aha, tam ste 3, Maja, v redu, to se pravi rečemo 31, a ne? Oziroma 30 skupaj, pardon. 30, evo. 30 Zoom, tukaj pa tako. Super, ok. Bomo to označili. In sicer skupaj prisotnih članov Društva Belis ob 20. uri z volilno pravico, Teja si rekla? 39. In sklep je sledeč, upravni odbor ugotavlja, da na 5. rednem občnem zboru ni prisotnih več kot tretjina članov društva, zato zbor še vedno ni sklepčen. Skladno s 23. členom statuta društva se začetek 5. rednega občnega zbora odloži za pol ure oziroma za nadaljnjih 30 minut in teh 30 minut je ostalo še ravno za dr. Martina, da nam pove še določene stvari. Čez 30 minut se pa dobimo in izpeljemo pregled najprej programa, potem pa volitve.
A mass murdering psychopath, carefully disguised by the World Health Organization as safe and effective. Don't think for a minute it's going to get better. Because the same guys that in 1913 decided to go ahead and start the public health vaccine program decided in 1941, through the Wellcome Trust, which was set up in 1924, that they were going to become the regulator of safety and efficacy for the United Kingdom. Now, isn't it interesting that the foundation set up by a pharmaceutical company set up its own regulator? Nothing could go wrong with this, right? If the regulator gets all of its funding from the company it regulates, that feels to me to be no conflict of interest. It gets better. In 1941, we have the Therapeutic Corporation Act, and then in 1947, we set up the World Health Organization. Now, I find this particular piece of information quite problematic because the founding of the World Health Organization in 1947 was done by none other than Dr. René Sand. That's who started the WHO. Now, hold that thought, and then let's look at what happened in 1952. The WHO Director General, Brock Chisholm, advocates for the role of the World Health Organization to be modified to become a goal of population control. Sit with me for a moment and ask this question. By the way, that's their writing. That's not me saying, oh, that's probably what he meant. He actually said the role of the World Health Organization is population control. And the Rockefeller Foundation, the Gates Foundation, the Wellcome Trust, and 2 other foundations from the UK actually all funded the first programs right after that report was granted. Now, if you go back and look at the chart of the World Health Organization, you find a little tiny problem. Because the chart of the World Health Organization does not provide a pathway for private sector interests to become sponsoring entities. There is no legal pathway to do that. That's tax evasion. We should call it what it is. Those foundations are not using the WHO as a charitable arm to go out and conduct research and do all their philanthropic activities. Those people are using the WHO as a marketing and distribution arm of their business, as evidenced by the fact that if you go back and you look at what the actual money does, is it goes back into the companies owned by the companies that did the donations. This is not an allegation. It's the audited financial statements. So this is not anything other than a marketing and distribution front that also provides immunity. And 1955, we have the malaria program. 1967, we say we eradicated smallpox. except for the fact that we haven't. 1974, the essential vaccine program is launched. 1988, after we pass, importantly, after we pass the 1986 immunization protections for manufacturers of vaccines in the United States under the National Vaccine Injury Prevention Act of 1986. We launched polio eradication. 2006, we launched HPV. 2011, we say that we're going to launch the decade of the vaccines, and we give the Gates Foundation the ability to, by 2023, be 88% of the donor-funded budget of the World Health Organization. 88% of the donations received through the donor programs of the World Health Organization are from the Gates Foundation. Does that sound like an independent agency? Does that sound like a philanthropic agency? Does that sound like anything remotely resembling anything that would even pass the sniff test of independence? No. That is a wholly owned subsidiary. By every definition of the law, it's a wholly owned subsidiary. And we pretend, to this day, that the World Health Organization has a health mandate. They do not. They said that they were going to create a worldwide vaccination program. They told us they were going to do it in 2011. The book, Decade of Vaccines, if you have not read that and you want your blood to boil, read that document. Because that's where they admit to the crimes that just happened. Now, this slide, if I had to pick one slide, is the simplest way to summarize what happened. In 2002, we developed the weapon. In 2003, the United States CDC patented the weapon in its first commercial deployment. In 2005, we actually turned that program into synthetic coronaviruses, biohacking, biological warfare enabling technologies in 2005. And then on September 18th, 2019, September 18th, 2019, we said that the World Health Organization was going to have a rapidly spreading pandemic due to a lethal respiratory pathogen. The World Health Organization said they were going to do it. They published it on September 18th, 2019. This is not an allegation, people. This was printed with the signatures of the criminals signing the page that said the death warrant to the world. And then we go down here to say, what is the progress indicator by September 2020? What's the progress indicator? By September 2020, the world would have the financing for and the manufacturing capacity for a pan-influenza, pan-coronavirus vaccine.
Where was it published?
In a thing called The World at Risk. You can look it up. This is page 8 of World at Risk. Everybody can download it, everybody can read it, and everybody should share it. This is the admission by the World Health Organization that they are going to do a release of a respiratory pathogen. And by the way, the reason why this is particularly important is they say a lethal respiratory pathogen. They knew they were going to kill people. That's why they use the word lethal.
But why is this so much in Australia?
No. We'll get to that whole story. But remember, all this stuff is theater. This is the crime, right? This is the crime.
If I might add something, this is the WHO.
Yeah, this is the World Health Organization Global Preparedness Monitoring Board.
2008, the CIA report said that it was going to be.
Oh, yeah. Remember, yeah.
Starting in China.
Exactly. These are all, what I'm doing is I'm strictly limiting ourselves to the actual criminal case. There are tons of motivations, tons of other theatrics, everything else. But this is the evidence that we can use in a criminal case to say, this was not an accident, this was not anything else, this was an actual premeditated act of lethality. Why am I alleging that? Not because somebody said there would be a thing. they actually not only told you when it was going to happen, but they told you the deadline for the outcome response. So we're going to release the pathogen so that by September 2020, the world has accepted a universal vaccine. That is prima facie terrorism, collusion, racketeering, criminal conspiracy, and, best of all, murder. So that's why we have the wanted posters. And some of these names are people that you know, because we've talked about them before. You know Peter Daszak, you know Ralph Barrick, but you don't know Vsaj, who happened at the time to be the racketeering, collusion, and interlocking directorate criminal who simultaneously sat on the Wellcome Trust board and was the head of the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board of the WHO. The same guy was running the funding for the crime and announced the crime. Same guy, and you guys don't know his name because nobody talks about him, except this crazy bow tie wearing bald guy from Virginia. Jeremy Farr, who was at the time the CEO of Wellcome. Chris Elias, who was the doctor from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Ghebreyesus, the head of the World Health Organization. Bill Gates, Anthony Fauci, and the World Health Organization, DARPA, the United Nations, Open Philanthropy, Rockefeller Foundation, the Wellcome Trust, and the Gates Foundation. These individuals, in a violation of racketeering, antitrust, and anti-competition laws, colluded to create the largest act of global terrorism known to Earth and announced the plan to do it on September 18th, 2019, with premeditation and with the intent to kill. This was entirely a premeditated act. They told us it would happen in 2011. They announced the event horizon in 2019. The DARPA piece came in the P3 program. And then I want you to read the title of the paper, and I told you we would come back to it. Remember I told you we have that 2002 patent that was going to come back to haunt us? Well, here it is, coming back to haunt us. The 2002 patent came back to haunt us during the gain-of-function moratorium because in the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in February of 2016, the following article was published. SARS-like WIV1-CoV poised for human emergence. Now you should be asking, hey Dave, what's WIV1? Well, that is Wuhan Institute of Virology COVID virus 1. And if you read the fine print of the article, you find out that when they said it was poised for human emergence, they didn't just say it was ready to be released. They actually went into detail about the best way to release it. In 2016. And at the bottom of that article, conveniently out of sight, because most people don't bother reading all the way down through the article, at the bottom of the article you find that the University of North Carolina Chapel Hill impaneled not one but 2 institutional review board reviews of this study. The first one to review the ethics of the study, and the second one to review the ethics of violating the law on the gain-of-function moratorium. UNC Chapel Hill was so concerned with breaking the law that they impaneled an ethics review board to examine the merits of breaking the law. That, by the way, is not a normal scientific process. You do not usually have an ethics board going, well, should we do this? And it's probably a bad idea. And then somebody goes, it's illegal. And then somebody goes, pause. Okay, this thing that's illegal, should we do the illegal thing? Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Okay, the guys over here said it was ethical to do the illegal thing to kill people. That happened and is published in this 2016 article. The crime, conspiring to commit acts of terror, restraint of trade, deceptive medical practices, price fixing, fraudulent conveyance. These are the crimes that the World Health Organization not only allowed to happen, but promoted these crimes and gave political cover for those crimes, and fraudulent conveyance and contracting, coercion and murder, the casualties, consent, and human lives. Because now, we actually now see the data. And the top line in that graph is the vaccinated, according to the British data. And what you see is now all-cause mortality in the ages of 18 to 55 is now 40% higher in the people that were injected with a biological weapon. That number is not going down. That number is going up in every jurisdiction. And here's the saddest part about it. That number will continue to go up. If they have their 2011 objective, that number will go up to 2 billion people. We... Huh?
How do they want to do that? Every year with a new vaccine?
Oh, yeah, but they don't have to do anything new. What's already been released in the spike protein, what has already been released because of the pseudouridine in the shot, has actually unleashed what they're now calling turbo cancers. This was known in 2018. Pseudouridine is known to be a suppressor of all cancer-controlling agents in the body. It directly impacts TNF, directly impacts interleukins, and it directly promotes oncogenic activity, which means that the people who are injected already have the switch turned on. And this is not going to be largely myocarditis. There will be a lot of heart disease, but the biggest killer is going to be cancer. And there's no question about it. We already see that happening.
Which kind of cancers, apart from lungs?
Well, no, it's actually mostly, here's the weird thing. It's not just lungs. What we're seeing is a lot of people who have breast cancers that were in some form of remission, maybe a small BRCA-related tumor that then has this gene turned back on and accelerate. So you're seeing a lot of people go from remission to stage 4. Not kind of a gradual thing. It goes, I'm in remission, I'm in stage 4. You're seeing an increase in prostate cancers, and most importantly, prostate cancer surgeries. There are those who understand that in population control, there's a lot of ways to control a population, but one of the best ways to control a population is make sex difficult, if not impossible. Don't think for a minute transgender accidentally showed up at the same time as COVID. Right? It didn't. This is all part of a plan. There's no question that prostate cancer and, more importantly, prostatectomies are part of the plan, because it turns out that it becomes very difficult to procreate if you don't have the ability to have intercourse. That's actually a kind of a rate-limiting step in intercourse. It's not surprising that we see an increase in ovarian and uterine cancers. It's not surprising that we're seeing an increase in pancreatic cancers and rapidly acting pancreatic cancers. It's not at all surprising that we are now seeing an enormous amount of lymphoma cases where you go from barely diagnosed to dead in the space of less than 2.5 months. And most importantly, the biggest one right now is melanomas. Those are going the fastest to death, right? These tumors are actually rapidly acting tumors. And that's the ones we know in largely adult populations. What we do not yet know, but I think is going to be a bigger shock to most people, is the children born of the injected. We have no idea, none. We have no idea what is going to be the prognosis of all of the idiopathic diseases that are going to be coming, because we didn't ever even bother to look.
But why do all the governments participate? I mean, if we can see that, then we are little people.
Yes.
Knowing nothing. It's highly put that the one who's not running is flying. How come they participate all? And I
Yeah.
think to say only the vassals of the USA, which is clear. I mean, the Swiss government or Germany or Spain or whatever they will do, they are vassals.
No question.
Please repeat the question.
Yeah. So this is a question of why would they, in the broader sense, why would the they participate?
Like Cuba.
Well, there's a bunch of places. We talked about Australia. Okay, we talked about all kinds of places. Austria, which was the first one to pass the law requiring that we actually go into a mandatory vaccine regime. These programs actually are showing you that the illusion that we had of the nation state was gone a long time ago. I gave a lecture in 2011 where I said the illusion of Westphalia was over. The delusion of Westphalia. Now, what is the delusion of Westphalia? For those of you not familiar with the historical reference, Westphalia was the agreements we made largely in Europe to start drawing lines on a map. Prior to that, we actually just said, who's the lord of wherever you live? You're the lord of wherever you live, then you're subject to. And in the Westphalia treaties, what we started doing was going, there's the line, oh, there's the line, oh, there's the line. And we started drawing lines on maps, and then we put convenient flags up, and we said, woohoo, now we have a flag, now we have a line, we now have countries. Well, here's what happened. In 1944, we killed Westphalia. 1944. And some of you should be sitting there going, but 1944, that was during the Second World War. And I'm saying, yes, 1944, during the Second World War, we killed Westphalia. And we did it in a very cunning way. What we did was we sent a lot of people over to a place called Bretton Woods in the United States. And in Bretton Woods in the United States, in the summer of 1944, a group of people who were never elected, never appointed, never did anything. In fact, a group of people not larger than the group of people here tonight. And this is the encouraging thing. I told you I'd end with a hopeful thing, because I'm not a minister sending you to hell. It's a hopeful thing. In 1944, a group no larger than this group right here tonight actually said, if the Allies win the war. Because it wasn't clear we were going to, by the way. It wasn't certain that we were going to. But the statement was, if we win the war, and if we come out as basically a cooperating League of Nations, the term that was used in the early and mid-40s, which ultimately became the United Nations, but then League of Nations, if we emerge as the League of Nations, what we will do is we will agree to establish multilateral agencies who will take over finance, health, trade. Well, let me pause for a minute. Finance, health, and trade. What other functions does a government do? No, I'm asking a real serious question. I would go as far as to say that in our collective lifetimes, none of us have lived in a sovereign state. None of us. And the evidence for it is GATT, which became the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, which became the World Bank and the IFC, and what ultimately became this nonsensical thing that you have in this particular part of the world, which is this nonsense of monetary unions that are all linked to what? The US dollar. We stopped having countries in 1944. And I love how nostalgic people go, but I still feel German. I still feel Swiss. Give me a friggin' break. I don't care what you feel. This is not a feeling exercise. This is our first opportunity to realize, are you ready for this? That we are a collective people without elected representation. Now, we could look at this and we could say, I wanted to have a patriarchal figure that lorded over me. I wanted to be subservient to whoever had a badge on their arm. I wanted to pay taxes to these nice people who helped me. We could do that. Or we could sit here in Basel on September the 12th, 2023, and we could say, hold on a minute. You mean a group this size got together in 1944 in the uber-rich Bretton Woods resort for the summer aristocracy in the United States, got together and just said, we're going to go ahead and take over the world. And they did. Here's the thing that blows my mind. And this is the end of this part of the conversation. I'm amazed at how little courage we have anymore. I don't know when we decided that they are powerful. When did we decide that? And the answer is we didn't. Through a series of acquiescent steps, we just let the theys of the world come in and say, we'd like to take your money. Okay, how much? Oh, we'd like to tell you what health is. Okay. Okay, we'd like to genetically modify your food so that your GI system is actually suffering from a pathogen that the Japanese knew would create biome gut disorders in 1904 called Bacillus thuringiensis, which is the BT that we use to genetically modify every food stuff that we produce in mass production. And we're more than happy to say, yes, line me up for my high fructose corn syrup. People, if we read Japanese, we would realize that in 1904, the Bacillus thuringiensis toxin was known to be a gut health disruptor, published as such in Japanese medical literature. And you know why you don't know that? Because it's in Japanese. We let the world have Crohn's disease, irritable bowel syndrome. We let the world have gut disorders. We let children have food allergies. And thank you for pointing that out. We let all of these things happen, and we did it because we couldn't read a Japanese paper from 1904 that actually said that that's exactly what was going to happen when all the biotech companies in the United States and Europe decided to collude to toxify our food with Bacillus thuringiensis because we could sell more glyphosate. If you do one thing tonight, do me the favor of stopping the illusion that you're Swiss or you're German or you're American or you're whatever you think you are. Start by examining what it means to be human. What does it mean to be human? What is the organic beauty of the human life? What is the capacity to assemble this being so that it can inhabit a world in which it has the ability and the faculties to perceive and sense and experience this amazing, beautiful world that we live in? What does it mean to be human, to be able to share information from experiences in lifetime? What does it mean to actually exchange ideas across cultures, have open conversations so that knowledge can flourish, and the Greek ideal of gnosis can return, where we don't know based on what we were told, but we know based on our lived experience? What would it be like if instead of value exchange denominated by central banks where we do debt-denominated currencies, what if we actually rewarded people for the value of their contribution? What if the ideal was not to pay as much as possible on the Bahnhofstrasse in Zurich, but pay for the value of the experience that somebody actually created for you, which you enriched your life with and through? What if that was our monetary system? Where we rewarded value, not price. What would it be like if our technology that we deployed across every experience was about diminishing the barriers to human connection rather than increasing our isolation through immersive and augmented and virtual reality? What if we had the capacity of realizing that the analog conditions of face-to-face contact, the communion of sitting down in fellowship and sharing a meal or sharing a drink or having a conversation or putting our arms around somebody and hugging somebody who actually just needs to experience the human touch, what if that were our definition of human? And what if ultimately we realized that at the gateway to the temple of Apollo, the inscription said, "Know thyself," so that when you entered into the holiest of the temples, you recognized that your job wasn't to convince somebody of your rightness or your merit, but to do the inner work, the inner examination that says, am I worthy to enter into the divinity of human interaction? What if that was our world? You know what we wouldn't have? The World Health Organization. You know what we wouldn't have? We wouldn't have federal states. You know what we wouldn't have? We wouldn't have fractional reserve banks that prop up illusionary interests so that we can save for a life not worth living. Ladies and gentlemen, the real purpose of my presentation and the real purpose of my life is singular. I've been told I should fear for my life because I speak out against the forces of evil. Guess what? They can't take what I cannot give them. This is not my life. This is a life. Not mine. You can't take it. Right now it's contained in this 56-year-old, sometimes slightly ailing frame. But it's a powerful frame, and it travels all over the world and does crazy things all over the world. And on the day I am no longer useful in this form, I will transform. That'll happen. God help the bad guys when I can move without being seen. Think about it. Why are we so worried? Why are we giving them the agency of fear? As long as I'm useful in this form, I will be in this form. And the minute I'm no longer useful in this form, I will transform. And I hope each one of you understands exactly the same thing. Make sure that you are worthy of transformation. Thank you very much.
Vrhunsko. Hvala, Mihael.
Nekaj, jaz sem tole videl, meni je bilo tole izjemno všeč in sem rekel tle toliko informacij, ki nam bodo vsem utrdile to, kar počnemo 3-4 leta. In v bistvu je povedano vse. Jaz bom ta video dal na Rumble, zato ker na YouTubeu ni šansa, ne? Tako da bom ga potem tudi na našem Telegramu podelil in še kje, tako da boste imeli to na voljo. Ok, ura je 20:30 plus 20:33, 20:33, če smo natančni. In ugotavljamo nocoj še zadnjič prisotnost. Tako, evo, če kdo vidi, tukaj jaz, kje moram to že pogledati, samo moment.
30 je prisotnih.
30 plus 5, ker so podvali 3, plus to, kolikor nas je tukaj vse skupaj, ja. Hvala lepa za pomoč, takšne rabim, to je fajn, da sodelujemo, odlično. Koliko je vse skupaj? 43. 43 prisotnih, skupaj prisotnih članov Društva Belis, nocoj na 5. občnem zboru, torej 43. Po poteku tega časa, skladno s 23. členom statuta Društva za srečno življenje Belis, ugotavljamo, da je na 5. redni občni zbor društva prisotnih 43 članov in zato je sklepčen. Ker je torej skupno število prisotnih 43 članov, lahko zakonito nadaljujemo s predlogom in izvolitvijo predstavnika Društva za srečno življenje Belis, ter predlog potrdimo ali z dvigom rok, ali če bi kdo hotel razpravljati. Zdaj, z dvigom rok ni treba, če se kdo ne strinja, naj dvigne roko, če se pa strinja, je pa najboljš, da da tihi pristanek, da ne bo preveč zmede na zaslonu. Ali se strinjate s tem? Dobro, tukaj? Ja, v redu. Torej, najprej, glede na to, da smo zdaj sklepčni na našem 5. občnem zboru, bomo pregledali pregled in potrditev sklepa o dnevnem redu 5. občnega zbora. To se pravi, pogledajmo najprej naš dnevni red, zdaj, ko smo sklepčni. Ugotovitev prisotnosti, to smo zdaj uredili. Točka 2. Sprejem in potrditev sklepa o dnevnem redu. To je to, kar delamo zdaj. Takoj po tej potrditvi bomo izvolili predstavnika, ki ga je upravni odbor predlagal v zapisniku, ki ste ga dobili pred enim tednom na mail v poročilu. In potem bomo naredili še pregled, potrditev in podpis zapisnika 5. občnega zbora Društva Belis. Ali se strinjate s tem dnevnim redom in ga sprejmete kot občni zbor?
Yes.
Ja?
Ja, seveda.
Ja? Ok. Hvala,
Ja.
vidim, strinjamo. Dobro, hvala. Srčna hvala. Torej, ugotavljamo, da je pregled in potrditev sprejet. Zdaj pa, glede na to, da je upravni odbor predlagal, ugotovili smo, da je po našem statutu 2-letni mandat predsednici potekel in na sestanku 21.6.2024 smo po elektronski komunikaciji v upravnem odboru, ko smo to opazili, rekli bomo naredili občni zbor en teden prej pred dopusti, ker pred 2 letoma, takrat, ko je naš prejšnji predsednik Miran dal ravno med dopusti odpoved, smo bili prisiljeni avgusta to delati. Zdaj smo pa rekli, pa lahko damo to en teden 14 dni prej, zaradi tega, ker je lažje narediti. Zdaj tik preden še vsi odidete na dopust. Ok, in smo predlagali, najprej smo se seveda Veljavni zahvalili in smo jo prosili, če bi bila pripravljena to še prevzeti s posvetovanjem tudi drugih članov, ki niso nasprotovali, vseh nismo mogli takoj obvestiti, ampak za predsednico društva je upravni odbor predlagal Veljavno Belis za mandat nadaljnjih 2 let, skladno s 35. členom statuta Društva Belis. Ali se s tem predlogom občni zbor na današnjem srečanju strinja?
Popolnoma se strinjam.
Hvala.
Popolnoma se strinjamo, ja.
Srčna hvala. Torej, pregled in potrditev dnevnega reda ter predlog za novega predsednika oziroma predsednico s podaljšanim mandatom Društva Belis se predlaga članica Veljavna Belis. Ok. In to je ta hip potrjeno, da je sprejeta kot predlog. In zdaj gremo na točko 3, izvolitev novega predstavnika Društva Belis na podlagi 6. točke člena 26 statuta društva. In vprašam najprej, ali smo za. Kdo je za? Rečemo ja ali ne. Kdo je za?
Ja.
Ja.
Dobro, to se pravi, nas je na Zoomu še kdo vidi številko? Ja, 30 plus 5 plus teko vse skupaj. Koliko nas je? Ok, super, 43 za. Ali je kdo proti?
Ne.
Hvala, proti nič. V redu, srčna hvala. Predlog torej v imenu 5. rednega občnega zbora, da se za novo predstavnico društva izvoli članica Veljavna Belis, ste prisotni člani 5. občnega zbora Društva za srečno življenje Belis soglasno sprejeli in potrdili. Torej lahko naredimo sklep. Člani Društva za srečno življenje Belis smo na 5. rednem občnem zboru dne 29.6.2024 z dvigom rok za 43 nič sprejeli sklep, da se za novo predstavnico Društva za srečno življenje sprejme Veljavna Belis. Naslednja točka je seveda čisto formalna, kjer moramo narediti potrditev novega in razrešitev starega vodstva, zato da je vse po regalcih, a ne? Sklep, člani Društva za srečno življenje Belis smo na rednem občnem zboru dne 29.6.2024 soglasno sprejeli sklep s 43 glasovi za in s nič glasovi proti, da se za novo predstavnico oziroma predsednico Društva za srečno življenje za mandat oziroma obdobje 2 let izvoli in potrdi Veljavna Belis. Veljavna, ki je v bližini, preden grem naprej na pregled zapisnika, ki ga moramo še potrditi v kompletnem zboru. A je Veljana kje v bližini? Je? Če naj jo pogled. Je Veljana, iskrene čestitke. Evo, občni zbor te je v celoti potrdil z glasovi 43 za in nič proti. Evo, samo toliko za začetek.
Ja, jaz se vsem vam zahvaljujem za zaupanje ponovno. Jaz lahko tukaj samo izjavim, da bom z vsem srcem še naprej izpolnjevala najbolj pomemben člen našega statuta za srečno življenje, to je 9. člen, prva alineja, da bomo živeli še naprej z brezpogojno ljubeznijo, jo širili in tudi živeli po principih brezpogojne ljubezni. In vsem vam, ki ste naša luč, ki ste ljubezen, ki ste rekli ne vsemu, kar ni ljubezen, kar ni življenje, iskrena hvala. Zato, ker več ko nas bo, prej bo Slovenija tista dežela, ki si vsi želimo, prijazna dežela za naše otroke, vnuke in seveda tudi za nas. Hvala lepa in še lep večer še naprej vam želim.
Iskrene čestitke tudi z moje strani in res lepo vodiš in skrbiš za društvo in za člane in naj tako ostane. Srčna hvala.
Tebi gre tudi velika zahvala, dragi Mihael.
Danes si ti na sporedu.
Vseeno bom rekla iskrena hvala, ker si z vsem srcem so dušo tudi zraven in brez tvojega supporta ne bi bilo to, kar je. To vsi vemo, a ne? Spoštovani člani Društva za srečno življenje Belis, dajmo en velik aplavz tudi Mihaelu.
Bravo.
Hvala lepa.
Čestitke obema.
Srčna hvala. Zdaj bi pa povabil našo Tejo pred mikrofon. Namreč imamo 4. in zadnjo točko, pregled, potrditev in podpis zapisnika. Najprej celoten zapisnik, imaš zapisnik tukaj? Prosim, ja. Se pravi, zapisnik je narejen in te prosim, če lahko v kratkem samo od začetka poročaš oziroma tako, da potem potrdijo naši člani to.
To se pravi, kar smo zdajle.
Tako, kar smo izvolili, tako, kar malo bližji stopi, ja.
Takole, ja, člani Društva za srečno življenje smo se danes na 5. rednem občnem zboru odločili in soglasno sprejeli sklep z glasovi 43 za in nič proti, da je naša nova oziroma nadaljuje svoj mandat predsednica društva Veljavna Belis. In smo jo tudi potrdili. Ja, to bi bilo
dobro. Se strinjate z zapisnikom, potem manjka samo še podpis upravnega odbora in pa seveda obvestilo upravne enote. Če se strinjate, recite ja.
Ja, pa hvala teji za tako odgovorno delo. To je težko delo.
Res je. Hvala. Srčna hvala.
To je zelo težko, ja. Poznam to delo.
Res je zahteva celega človeka, nič pa. Veste, kako vam povem, torej statut in zakon o društvih in potem seveda tudi vsa procedura, ki jo peljemo, če najde upravni organ napako, je treba ponoviti. Upam, da napake ni, da smo to peljali zdajle brezhibno, tako kot mora biti in bomo seveda upravni organ obvestili in potem vas bomo obveščali tudi naprej. Teja, srčna hvala. Tale zapisnik je zdaj potrjen in mi smo nekako s tole 4. točko potrditvijo zapisnika z vaše strani, ki ga bo novi upravni odbor z vsemi funkcijami in člani, ki imajo še funkcije, ki ostanejo, zamenjal se je samo 2 leti, ker ostali imajo po 4 leta mandatno dobo. Ostane nam le še to, da naši predsednici Veljavni Belis ponovno iz vsega srca čestitamo in ji želimo, da še naprej tako pozorno in previdno v duhu in telesu vodi naše poti v srečno življenje. Tako da, draga Veljana, srčna hvala Srčna hvala vsem za podporo in Iveljana, izvoli, beseda je tvoja.
Moja današnja tema je blagoslovi duhovništva. Kot je že Mihael povedal, posvetil se je na današnji dan pred 36 leti v Mariboru in se odločil, da bo delal tisto, kar je Božja volja, da bo širil Božjo besedo, da bo dajal ljubezen in da bo delal za lepši svet. Ni naključje, da sem na isti dan istega leta se tudi jaz odločila, sicer v Ameriki, v Montani, da bom tudi svoje življenje predala Božji volji. In verjetno ni naključje, da sva se čez pol leta srečala. In Božja volja je bila, da skupaj kot mož in žena, kot dva, ki sta zavezana Božji volji, nadaljujeva to poslanstvo, zato ker Bog je ustvaril družino. Bog je ustvaril Adama in Evo, moža in ženo, da bi rojevala otroke in napolnila svet z ljubeznijo in z radostjo. Vsi poznamo zgodbo, da zaradi tega, ker se ni uresničil Božji načrt, da bi resnično delali to, kar je Božja volja, da je prišlo na zemljo tisto, kar nihče od nas ne želi. Bolezen, staranje, vojne, zavist, ločitve in nenazadnje tudi smrt. Človeštvo brez Božjega duha gre v napačno smer. In človeštvo je šlo v napačno smer. In Bogu hvala, da je ljubezen Boga tako velika, da nam je poslal svojega lastnega sina, s katerim je ustvarjal vse. Z ljubeznijo vse ustvarjal. In nič, kar je na zemlji živega, ni nastalo brez te ljubezni. In ljubezen se materializirala, rodil se je človek ljubezni v ta padli svet, kjer je bila smrt, bolezni, vojne, ločitve, uboji, laži, prevare. In kdor je sprejel to resnico v svoje srce, v svojega duha, tako kot sem jaz sprejela, kot je Mihael sprejel in še veliko ljudi, grejo v drugo smer, v smer radosti, sreče, življenja, zdravja. In to je zelo preprosto. Kdor sprejme ljubezen za svojo pot, v svoje srce, je ljubezen tista moč, tista sila, ki nam daje novo življenje. In postajamo duhovna bitja, bitja ljubezni, bitja duha, ne mesena bitja, ne bitja tega sveta, ampak duhovna bitja. V Kristusu ni ne žene, ne moža, smo vsi Božji otroci. In blagoslovi duhovništva so blagoslovi, ki jih ta svet potrebuje. In več kot nas bo, ki bomo sprejemali brezpogojno ljubezen za našo novo pot, ki bomo sprejemali ljubezen in jo tudi darovali in blagoslavljali ta svet. bo ta svet postal planet sreče, radosti, zdravja. Ni naključje, da na današnji dan, 29. junij, se tudi v cerkvi še vedno posvečujejo mladi fantje, ki želijo nekaj dobrega narediti za ta planet, za sebe, za svojo družino. In iskrene čestitke prav vsem, ki so se odločili za Božjo pot, za Božji poklic. Vendar moramo vedeti, da smo vsi duhovna bitja. Ne glede na to, smo ženske ali smo moški, v Kristusu ni razlike. Ni ne belca, ne črnca, ni Slovenca, ne Srba, ni dobrega in slabega. V Kristusu smo vsi eno. Smo duhovna bitja, bitja ljubezni, ki lahko blagoslavljamo. In širimo to čudovito ljubezen, ne samo za naše družine, ampak tudi za naše sosede. In smo dober zgled za ta svet. Blagoslovi duhovništva so zelo pomembni, da jih razumemo, tako kot nam jih je Bog predal. Prav vsak, popolnoma vsak lahko sprejme duhovniško maziljanje, ker je to zastonjski dar iz neba. Ne rabimo dovoljenja od inštitucij, da delamo dobro, da širimo ljubezen, da smo to, kar smo, otroci ljubezni. Ne potrebujemo tega. Dovolj je, da sprejmemo to resnico, da je že vse narejeno za nas, za našo radost, za naše življenje, za mir na zemlji, za mir med nami. In blagoslovi duhovništva so darovani za vse nas, za vas, ki me sedaj poslušate, za mene in prav za vse ljudi. Tudi za tiste, ki še ne vejo, da je to dar, brezplačni dar od stvarnika nebes in zemlje. In ko bomo vsi to sprejeli kot darilo in bomo zaživeli to duhovništvo, tega duha Božjega, ne bo več bolezni, ne joka, ne stisk, ne vojne, ne zavisti, ne ločitev, ne bolezni. Bomo duhovna bitja, ki bomo na tej zemlji, vendar ne od te zemlje. Ta zemlja nam je darovana, da hodimo po njej z ljubeznijo, da jo blagoslavljamo. Ne, da jo uničujemo z jezo, sovraštvom, z bombami, s cepivi, kemijo, zdravili, ampak da jo blagoslavljamo z ljubeznijo. In na današnji dan, 29. junij, ko se dejansko veliko ljudi po svetu na en način krščuje v duhovna bitja, bi rada dala spodbudo. Ne glede na to, kje ste sedaj, kdo ste, koliko ste stari, ali ste moški ali ženska. Enostavno sprejmite resnico, da ste vredni vseh blagoslavov, ki so zastonjski dar direktno iz neba. Sprejmite jih in jih darujte naprej. Blagoslovi so za nas, za vse nas. Bog je pravičen, ne dela razlik, ljudje delajo razlike, ampak naš stvarnik nas enako ljubi, prav vse. In to je moje sporočilo danes, da so blagoslovi duhovništva darovani za vse nas. Hvala lepa za vašo pozornost.
Draga Julijana, srčna hvala. za te tvoje spodbudne besede in z njenimi besedami danes, s temi mislimi, s to duhovno poslanico, če smem temu tako reči, zaključujemo današnje srečanje. Jaz bi se vsem iz vsega srca rad zahvalil za nocojšnjo prisotnost, za vašo aktivnost skozi vsa ta leta in se priporočamo še naprej, da delujemo skupaj. Seveda bi vas pa zdaj ob tem opozoril na eno stvar, ki jo bom podelil še z vami. Poglejte, zapišite si, upam, da se vidi. Naslednje redno srečanje Društva Belis bo v soboto 17. avgusta 2024, ko se bomo ponovno srečali. Do takrat pa si bomo nabrali novih moči, se malo spočili za naše prihodnje skupno dobro delo. Upravni odbor Društva Belis. Vkolikor se pa vmes pokaže kritična situacija ali se pokaže kaj nujnega, vas bomo pa iz društva obvestili, seveda pa, tako kot do zdaj velja, da tudi vi pokličete v društvo, vkolikor zaznate stvari, da se medsebojno obvestimo in pravočasno reagiramo. Torej, še enkrat, srčna hvala za pomoč, za suport, za sodelovanje in skupaj gremo naprej. Lep večer, lepo soboto, jutri lepo nedeljo. Jaz bom jutri šel v Maribor k mami praznovati 90 njenih let, se srčno veselim, stvari se kar dogajajo in kup stvari je. Imejmo se radi, spodbujajmo se in lahko noč vsem. Hvala lepa.
Lahko noč, hvala ti.
Lahko noč. Ja, lahko noč.